Hello YouTube. Today I'm doing a video of Bushcraft Clothing as requested by Mike from Cornish Knives. As I asked for suggestions, that's one of the ones that came up. So today I'm just going to do a basic rundown of ideal equipment for, or gear, clothing equipment for bushcraft and outdoors. And this is going to be quite a concise version, like a condensed version, so I'm not going to go into too much detail because that would make a really long video and people would get bored part way through. And also I'm going to be doing this, explaining more about the sort of current climate that we're in at the moment, the season, if you like, which is sort of spring, summer sort of season. So when it's slightly warmer, but it can be a bit wet, as it has been for the last week or so. Or just about a week. But I will go into the winter sort of side of clothing at another date later on when it gets closer to the winter side. I'll go into more detail on that. So let's get started. This will be a head to toe sort of video. So I'll start with a hat. A lot of people tend not to wear hats for when they're out in the woods. Which is fair enough, because there's not usually a lot of sun that comes through from the canopy, and in warmer weather you can start to overheat a bit if you're wearing a warm hat. But there are times when you may be in a sort of clearing in the woods or near the edge of a wood or on the way where you're walking to the woods even, where you'll want some kind of sun protection. So for that you'd want a wide brimmed hat or a fishing hat, something like that, and preferably semi-breathable if you can get it, so the sweat from your hair sort of can evaporate out of the hat somewhere, so you don't get a soaking wet rim around where the hat is sat. Any sort of material really will work for that sort of hat, but a polycotton one would probably be the best one. Some companies make treated hats which are insect repellent as well, which can be a good idea for warm weather. I have one in here actually. The hat I use in the summer most is just a simple reversible fishing hat style sort of thing. Really, it was only a cheap thing. I think this is only a cotton one, but it does for the purpose. And as you can see, it's got sort of little vent holes in either side, two on each side. Some of them also have a draw cord to stop them blowing off in sort of windy weather. But these are useful, as I say, for keeping the sun off your neck and off your face when it's at the peak sort of heat, which is right at the top of the sky, noon, sort of around noon time, which obviously saves you getting sunburn, and also protects you a bit from the rain. If it starts raining and it's quite hot, you don't want a really heavyweight hat on your head. Something like this is ideal. And it keeps a lot of the breeze from out of your ears as well. Surprising how much breeze it will keep out, and you don't want a lot of wind in your ears normally, as it will cause you to have earache and things like that. So that's the hat, and as I say, this is for the current season we're in, rather than other seasons. Moving down to the top layer, you want a base layer is generally the best thing to have in all weather conditions, which at the moment I've just got this basic t-shirt on, which isn't the best option for a base layer, but I'm not doing a lot of activities while I'm out today, so it's not too bad. The point of the base layer is to wick away the moisture that your body produces, your sweat, as you're sort of active or just general perspiration, and it takes all the moisture away from the skin to the outer layer where it can evaporate without taking body heat away, and also stops you getting sweat rashing around places that you may not find very comfortable. The base layer needs to be made of a synthetic mix, really, like a polycotton or some of these modern fabrics. A lot of the time I'll just go with a sports top, like an Adidas or a Nike sports top, because they're designed to wick away the moisture just like any other base layers are, and quite often they're on sale cheap, so lots of sports outlets sell them cheaper, so that's one option for those. In colder weathers you may want a thermal one as well, as but any wicking one will give you some level of thermal protection. Moving on to the mid layer, or as I say, it's for the season. You don't want anything too thick, but you want something that you can put on if it starts to get a little bit colder. And I normally use either a micro fleece, which is basically something like this, or a Norwegian style shirt. Again, it wants to be a synthetic fabric, really. It doesn't want to. You want to avoid cotton, and but mind you, wool can be good. But wool can also lose its insulative properties when it's wet. But so synthetic ones are normally best to go for, as they combine the benefits of wool and still provide a semi-wicking, breathable, fast-drying sort of layer. As I say, this is a micro fleece one. It doesn't really particularly matter on the brand or the cost of it, but where the cost comes in is how long they'll last, how long the stitching will last, and how well it fits. Some of the cheaper ones have very short sleeves, for instance, and most people like to have their sleeves down if they're wearing a base layer. I usually have mine rolled up so it doesn't bother me. You can either go for a zip front or a over the head one. I prefer the over the head type, as zips can break quite easily, especially on the cheaper ones. So again, if you're buying a cheaper sort of brand of micro fleece, you'll want to avoid any sort of unnecessary zip breakages. And when you're using them as an insulating layer, the zip can let a lot of draft through as well, which is going to cause you to lose heat. So a pullover one is a lot better, generally speaking, for all-round use, and especially in the woods where you may get snagged and pull around a bit. That's another problem with the wool jumpers. If you snag them, they can tend to start to unravel. So that's normally why I prefer going with a micro fleece. They can be susceptible to sparks and fire though. When a spark or an ember lands onto the fleece, it will often melt a small mark into it, but it's not going to ruin the whole thing. It would take a lot of areas to get all melted to lose any of the insulating values for it. So I tend to stick with one of those. And the jacket, as I'm wearing today, is a waterproof fleece, and obviously most waterproof clothing is windproof as well, but you need to try and get one that's breathable and waterproof at the same time, which tend to be a little bit more expensive unless you can find second-hand Gore-Tex gear or something like that, or like army surplus Gore-Tex gear. Again, you want to avoid natural fibres, as they can hold on to the moisture and lose all their insulating value. So it's best to stick with micro fleece or a lined Gore-Tex jacket of some kind. The reason why you want to avoid cotton for any of your clothing really is because it traps the moisture and it doesn't like releasing it, but it holds it against your skin. So when it's cold, it acts as a thermal bridge, so all of your body heat gets transmitted through that moisture and into the atmosphere as it's gradually, very slowly evaporating from the surface. So you may have heard the expression cotton kills, and that's where that comes from, is because cotton is generally a bad thing. And also when it's holding on to moisture, if you're doing a lot of activities, it will be very abrasive and again cause you to have sweat rash and things like that, which are generally unpleasant, and they can promote fungal growths and like athlete's foot and things like that. So generally you want to avoid cotton at all costs really. If you want an extra layer over your base layer, but not quite as much as a mid layer, a good polycotton shirt will do. You could probably get away with a cotton shirt at a push, as long as you're not doing a lot of physical work and you tend to have it unbuttoned rather than buttoned up and untucked, because the air can circulate underneath it a little bit, and you're generally not going to be in such freezing cold temperatures that loss of body heat is going to be a danger to you. So it can be a bit of a gamble, but it's best to go with a polycotton shirt if you can get one. All the Kraghopper stuff is polycotton and a synthetic material, so that's why I tend to wear their trousers and their shirts if I'm wearing a shirt. Moving on to the trousers, or pants if you're in America. Again, polycotton, breathable, something like that. It doesn't need to be too heavyweight in the summer, obviously, because you want to try and avoid overheating if you're strenuous, but later at night, when it starts to get chilly, you may want slightly thicker trousers. So I tend to go with the winter-lined Craghoppers ones, and they can get very hot if you're doing a lot of walking, but if you're just walking from the car to the woodland, or maybe a maximum of 2-3 miles, something like that, you shouldn't feel it shouldn't overheat you too much we're in the UK, unless it's really peak sort of heat. So it's best to go with a lighter weight Craghoppers, just the standard Kiwi or the base camp ones, something like that. I also try to avoid zip-off trousers, because again, the zips can fail on some trousers, some manufacturers, and if you kneel down to do anything like starting a fire or anything, the zips can push into your knees or shins, depending on how far up the zip is, and cause quite a lot of pain and discomfort. British Army combat trousers and lightweight trousers are a good option if you want to save money, as they are made of polycotton, and so they won't hold onto the moisture as much as cotton, and they'll do a certain amount of wicking to get the moisture away. They're also relatively hard wearing, so if you're walking through a lot of brambles or gorse bushes or blackthorn or hawthorn bushes, they'll tend to resist the snagging quite a lot, so they'll last a bit longer there, and generally the stitching is generally pretty good on them, as they're designed for a combat situation. They are pretty fast drying as well, so or the Soldier 95 onwards are. Some of the older ones had a lining in, which made them dry a little bit slower, so you'd have wet legs longer, but generally when the sun comes out or you're sat by the fire, they will dry out pretty fast. So Army surplus stuff is perfectly fine and ideal for bushcraft. It's also in subdued colours, and a lot of people don't like to wear bright fluorescent colours in the woods, either to stop other people seeing them and disturbing them, or animals if they're trying to watch for wildlife and things like that. So yeah, military surplus is fantastic stuff if you can get hold of it for the right price. Craghoppers stuff, all of Craghoppers stuff is very good stuff. Some people have problems with the stitching on it, but I wear Craghoppers almost every day, even when I'm not coming to the woods, and I've only ever had one pair where there's a slight lining at the bottom half of the trouser that the stitching's come undone, but it's not a huge problem. They're still wearable. As it's in on the inside, it's not got a hole through the top. So, and again, they make solar dry ones, which are fast drying in the sun, and I believe they also make mosquito repellent ones. Same with the shirts. So generally, they're pretty good for the price. They're not extortionate prices, but they're not ultra cheap all the time. Very often they're on offer in different places as well. So that's a good one to go for. I'm not sure about the more expensive brands like 511s, because I tend to stay away from things like that. I don't like spending a lot of money on things that like clothing that I'm going to wear to the woods that are going to get covered in mud and possibly torn. So they may be perfectly good and very hard wearing, but as I say, the Craghoppers I've had pairs that have lasted 4 years, 5 years maybe. So you get good use out of them for the price. So it's not really worth me spending the extra money on a more expensive pair, even if they are relatively hard wearing, because I'm sure they're not 5 times as hard wearing, even if they're 5 times the price. But so if you prefer to go with something like that, then that's totally fine. If you could afford it as well, by all means. Socks again, and underwear. You want to avoid cotton if possible, because of the drawbacks of cotton. Varying thicknesses of socks can be required at different times. I find a nice thin pair in the woods in the summer is okay for me. They're probably not the best for long walking distances like hiking or backpacking, as there's no cushioning in them. So, but they're ideal for sitting around a fire and avoiding your feet getting hot and sweaty, because I also tend to wear neoprene Wellington boots, like muck boots, in the woods, especially when it's weather like this, because it's been raining, as I say, for nearly a week now, if not more. The ground is very boggy, so then they're a lot easier they're more waterproof. They're not quite as breathable, but they are more waterproof than most boots. They're relatively cheap at about 30 to 35 pounds a pair, depending on where you buy them. Or you can go for the genuine muck boot ones, which are a lot more expensive, about 70 pounds more, possibly. But they're fine, and they're easy to slip on and off if you when you're getting in and out of your hammock and sleeping bag and things like that. So, and they're easy to slip on in the morning or in the middle of the night should you need to visit the latrine or whatever. So I tend to just stick with these neoprene boots in most situations or circumstances. If I'm walking more than 4 or 5 miles to the site, then I'll wear my hiking boots I've got, and generally you want to stick with leather hiking boots if you can. Again, army surplus, especially the German para boots are very good leather boots. I've got a pair of Mindals myself, which are a bit more expensive, but they are very comfortable, very light, and leather and fully waterproof. Again, you want to try and go with a breathable kind of boot if you can, and obviously leather isn't going to be very breathable at all. It's listed as breathable, but obviously it doesn't breathe fast enough to stop your feet sweating, so you may want to take a break every few miles or so and take your boots off just to let them breathe a bit. Again, you may not want to do that if you're starting to get blisters or swollen feet, because it may be hard to get your boots back on again, but hopefully they shouldn't be that uncomfortable that they're going to get to that stage, and you shouldn't be walking hard enough to cause that to happen. You don't want to push yourself really, because you rely on your feet to walk a lot. I think I've pretty much covered it. Oh yeah, if you don't have a waterproof fleece type jacket to put on in the summer, thin lightweight sort of pack away waterproof breathable jackets are another option. Obviously they're being a softer sort of shell fabric and a thinner fabric on the top, they're less resistant to snagging and tearing on thorns and thistles and things like that. So you may have to be a bit more careful as you're walking around in the woods to avoid damaging it, because obviously if you put a hole in it, it's going to be not going to be any good for rain protection. I think that's pretty much it. You want basically just make sure that you get clothing that fits as well, because you want something. For tops, you want them long enough to be able to tuck into your trousers or pants, to stop any draft coming in and loss of heat going out for when it gets a bit colder. You want to make sure the sleeves are a reasonable length so that they come down to your cuffs. Also, ideally, in an emergency situation, you want them to be long enough to get your hands inside. If your gloves are wet, or you've lost your gloves, or you didn't even bring any gloves out, then it's good to be able to get your hands inside your sleeves should you need to, just to try and stop the heat loss. When you're wet, you'll lose heat about 25 times faster than when you're dry, so you want to try and stay dry. Unless it's, as I say, it's the peak of summer and it's a summer shower, then you'll tend to dry out pretty quickly, but you can still lose quite a bit of warmth that way, so try and stay dry if you can. It's a lot easier to stay dry than it is to get dry afterwards, unless you take some spare clothing and change into that. The same with warmth. If it's in the spring or the autumn, when it may be reasonably warm during the day but very cold at night, you'll want to try and put your clothing on before it gets really cold, because it's a lot easier to maintain your body heat than it is to try and build it back up again once you've got cold. And the same works the other way as well. If you're walking a long distance, or you're doing a lot of strenuous activities like firewood collecting or cutting or chopping and things like that, then you'll want to take off your top layers, and down to your base layer if you can. If it's a little bit cold for the base layer on its own, then you may want to put your mid layer on as well. If you find you're getting particularly sweaty, then take a layer off if you're continuing. and that way you'll avoid excess moisture build up in your clothing, and you can put them back on afterwards once you've sat and rested, and stop yourself cooling down too fast and straining your muscles and things like that. So that's the other side of the coin. There's the thermal coin, I suppose you could call it. I think that's pretty much covered it. As I say, I'll go into the winter side of clothing when it gets nearer to that sort of time. I'll talk to you about layering and draft exclusion and things like that. So hopefully that's been of some use to you, and hopefully that's helped, or that's covered the things you were expecting, Mike. Okay, thanks for watching.